The NTSB has just released their initial report of a private jet that crashed into a San Diego neighborhood. The report answers some critical questions while leaving some others unanswered. The crash killed Dave Shapiro, who was a prominent music agent, as well as 5 others on the plane. On this flight, Dave was flying as the sole pilot on board. The flight started in New Jersey's Teterboro Airport just before midnight and made its first stop in Wichita, Kansas about 4 hours later. After picking up some fuel, it departed for its final destination of Montgomery Gibbs Executive Airport in San Diego. Like many airports around the world, Montgomery Gibbs only operates a control tower for part of the day. After 6 p.m. and before 7 a.m., the airport reverts to an uncontrolled airport. This means that the pilot is the sole person responsible for navigating the aircraft safely. At the time, the weather was quite poor, with only a half-mile of visibility and only a cloud base of around 200 feet above the ground. To make matters worse, the automatic weather system at Montgomery Gibbs was not operational.
Montgomery Gibbs Executive Airport.
Automated weather observation 1047 Zulu. Wind missing. Visibility missing. Sky condition missing. Temperature missing. Dew point missing. Altimeter missing. Remarks. Density altitude missing. Present weather information not available.
Despite knowing this, the pilot opted to proceed and make an attempted landing at Montgomery Gibbs, but not before asking the terminal radar approach control for the most accurate weather information available. I'll spare you the entire radio conversation, but they weren't able to find any airports in the area with favorable weather conditions. The pilot switched the airport frequency, hoping he wouldn't need to abort the landing.
Roger that, frequency change approved.
Up there, thanks. We'll hopefully not see you, but we might have to.
Okay.
To understand the final parts of this accident sequence, we first need to understand a bit about instrument approaches. The final part of an instrument flight is the instrument approach to land that you can think of like an off-ramp from the sky down to the runway. These approaches are carefully designed by engineers to provide the maximum clearance between the aircraft and terrain. On paper, they look like a 2-dimensional map, but they include a 3-dimensional altitude component as well. If a pilot follows these procedures correctly, they're guaranteed not to hit any terrain or obstacles. On this particular approach, the pilot is supposed to stay at 3,600 feet or above at Nesty. At Penny, the pilot is supposed to be at 2,500 feet or above. And at Palos, they're supposed to be at 1,380 feet or above. In the NTSB report, they noted that the pilot crossed Palos at 1,190 feet, nearly 200 feet below the minimum crossing altitude. But the final and often most important part of these charts is the minimum section. Depending on the aircraft's equipment on board, they might have different minimum altitudes. At the time of this report, the NTSB is unsure if they were flying an LPV or an LNAV approach. The first number on these charts indicates the altitude that they must not go below unless they can see the runway visually. If they cannot see the runway, they must initiate a missed approach. The next number indicates minimum visibility in statute miles. A pilot is not permitted to even start this approach unless the visibility is above this number. The nearest weather reporting station at Miramar was reporting a visibility of 1/2 mile, which is less than the minimum requirement. But because the weather reporting was offline, technically this number was unknown. But as the pilot noted in an earlier conversation with air traffic control, the weather, especially the fog, can vary dramatically between adjacent airports.
6 Delta here. Just wanted to know if you really had any idea on the weather. I got the Gillespie weather, but as I'm sure you know, sometimes it can be dramatically different between Gillespie and Montgomery.
The final reported altitude, according to the NTSB, was 464 feet, more than 200 feet below the minimum altitude for an LPV approach. The first point of impact was along power transmission lines about 95 feet above the ground. The NTSB found parts of the horizontal stabilizer, left elevator, and vertical stabilizer likely separating at this point of impact. The main wreckage was found a few hundred feet after that in a residential area where it impacted a building and several cars. The NTSB were able to recover a cockpit voice recorder, but have yet to extract any audio. The plane was not equipped with flight data recorders, however, it does have engine controllers called FADEX that do log certain parameters. One other interesting bit of information is that Montgomery Gibbs had part of its runway landing lights out of order during the accident. These lights have been inoperative since March of 2022. That's more than 3 years. The reason the runway lighting repairs were delayed was because they were waiting for an environmental impact study, but it was only part of the lights lights that were offline called the runway alignment indicators. These are flashing lights that align with the runway that make it very easy for the pilot to see. The rest of the lighting system was operating normally. However, it's unclear if this lighting malfunction played any effect whatsoever. This pilot had flown into here regularly and was aware of these lights being inoperative. But much more importantly, considering the weather, it's unclear if the pilot would have been able to see those lights if they were working correctly. But this all begs the question, why was the pilot so low? One possibility is that the pilot was flying without vertical guidance and wasn't monitoring his altitude very closely. He may have just set a vertical speed on the autopilot and not double-checked the altitude he should be at. Another possibility is an instrumentation issue. If his instruments were showing the wrong altitude, he might have believed he was higher than he actually was. Nothing in the report precludes a mechanical issue. If there was a problem with the elevator or the engines, he might not have even been able to maintain altitude. But one of the more interesting theories is that he might have been trying to scud run. Scud running is a very dangerous practice performed by some pilots where they fly below a very low cloud base just to maintain visual contact with the ground. In some cases, this can even be legal despite the inherent risks. After a long night of flying into a familiar airport, he might have felt the confidence to drop below the clouds and try to get home. Personally, I find this theory to be unlikely. Listening to the air traffic control radio, it was clear that he was mentally prepared to go around. But the NTSB will have more information once they process the cockpit voice recorder. We wish the pilot and his passengers blue skies and tailwinds. We're going to be keeping our eye on this one. And on another note, I'm looking for airline pilots who have seen the latest season of the Rehersal with Nathan Fielder. If you have an opinion about his conclusions, either positive or negative, please reach out to the email in the description. And if you've made it this far, be sure to hit the subscribe button for more content just like this.